Hi guys, welcome to this episode of What's in a Name. Today we have a guest with us, Marshall.
Marshall's
Hello.
yes, hi. Marshall's a philosophy and linguistics major at the University of Connecticut. And today we're going to be talking to him about his conversion to Buddhism and his opinions regarding Eastern religions.
And we thought this was especially important that we, talk about this because a lot of, people in India at this point in time are ashamed of their religion and their cultural heritage and background. So we thought we'll ask somebody who's not been in the Eastern strata, ask him how his journey has been and why exactly he converted and how it was.
So like what got you interested in Hinduism and Buddhism?
Yeah, so first I want to say thanks for having me on the show. Um, and I think it really started with my exploration into like Chinese culture and just Eastern culture in general at a point in my life where I was not even looking for any religious engagement at all, but I was looking for a new mindset philosophically because I've been interested in philosophy for almost my whole life. And I came across Buddhism more as like a psychological exploration because it was introduced to me as pretty much like a self-help religion. Um, and that's where I started, and it really just started with like the basics of Buddhism, the psychology behind it, and then I began meditating, and that was when I was about 10 years old. And then it pretty much, as I continued meditating, I started to see positive effects from it. And at the same time, I began to research Buddhism more and find out that Buddhism sprouted out of Hinduism. And from there, I just learned about all of the Eastern religions and how growing up in America, you kind of have a specific view of what religion is like, right? Like people take religion really, really seriously. People are more liable like get into arguments over religion. You usually assume that religion has to do with worshiping something and following a set of strict guidelines, and it can sometimes even have like a political air to it as well. So it was really liberating when I discovered and started exploring Eastern traditions because the Eastern religions aren't like that so much. They're a bit more free form, right? Especially with Buddhism, how like the basic psychology of Buddhism is the same all across the Eastern world, but essentially like as it moved across Asia, it was this, people took their own religion and then essentially tried to synthesize it with the Buddhist philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave me a really new perspective on what religion is actually like on a world scale.
That's really cool. But
It's quite interesting that you actually say that because in India you actually associate Hinduism with as a religion that actually is like completely filled with practical rituals because people are actually exposed to Hinduism as it was practiced after the Bhakti movement, which revolves around going to the temple, offering prayers, doing pujas, and it's quite interesting that you were not exposed to that because even if you think about the Hare Krishna movement or you think about most of the other exposures that people in the West have towards in Hinduism, it always is about bhajanas and but I think you on the other hand were exposed to I mean, have you read the Vedas or have you read the Gitas? Where is it that you got your exposure about Hinduism from? You know.
Yeah, so my exposure to Hinduism was actually like a pretty recent endeavor. I learned the basics of it just from where I learned a lot of things, Wikipedia. Um, but it wasn't until like 2 years ago that I decided to read the Rig Veda, and then I read the Bhagavad Gita because I was I'm a slow reader, so I looked at the Mahabharata and I'm like, there's no way I can read this thing. So I read the Gita, and I know like a little, the basics of the Ramayana. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of introduced me to what Hinduism is about, so to speak. Like, what are the primary values and morals that Hinduism bases itself around? But other than that, I talked to a lot of Hindus, and I was just amazed at how, in the West, whatever denomination of like Christian you are, they're all pretty much the same. But in Hinduism, it seems like there's you can you people I don't know if I'd use the word specialize, but they care about different deities, right? And they might have a primary one, and that is kind of your personal choice. And that was never something I encountered in Western religion at all. So that was unique, and that's why learning about Hinduism was such an interesting thing, because anytime you ask a different person what it's like, they will give you a bit of a different answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I knew of like small towns that were dedicated to particular gods. Like, do you remember the beer god? There's like this small town in South India where you have to pour beer over the idol of the god, and that's how you pray to him. And ironically enough, that's the prasad that you get. Like, you get like a little gift at the end of your temple visit, which is like a gift from the gods, and that's basically beer. So I'm sure that was very popular. But I mean, yeah, there are like regional gods that gain popularity over the years, and whole cities that revolve around temples, just because of like how ancient it is. Like, I know there was a lot of drama over the Padmanabha Swami temple in South India, which has like billions of dollars, like not dollars, but billions of dollars worth of gold in its like coffers, and no one is allowed to touch it. And it's not even private property to an extent. Like, it's so legally contentious, but no one even wants to touch that, because like there's so much like emotion attached to the temple around where people where people live around it, and it's just like so hard to discuss things like this without actually creating like huge riots like what happened in Bangalore. So it's
but even though we've had this entire conversation about how people have different experiences, all these experiences are are based from Hindu people who follow Hinduism as it has evolved after the Bhakti movement. Even before that, there was a form of Hinduism. Actually, there's this huge narrative about how you cannot actually call Hinduism a religion at all, because when you think about a religion, you have certain specific rules. You have, like, okay, for example, if it is Christianity, you have certain morals, like you have the 10 testaments, you have a book to follow, you have you have certain rules, and I don't know, and at least you have a book, you have a particular god. But in Hinduism, nothing is defined. I mean, if you think of what is the essence of Mahabharata, you are taught that there is your karma, you have a dharma, you have to do what you need to do. They don't essentially impose anything on you. The same way, the religion doesn't impose anything on you. So there's this entire, conversation that is there where people are trying to say that, hey, you can't actually call Hinduism a religion, it's more of a way of life. And, because you don't have, any guidance per se.
But we do have a pretty powerful structure of organized Hinduism around like the basic Hinduism. Like, I know that it's very free. It's called like a liberating religion, mainly because like how they treated women. The general Hindu attitudes towards women are significantly better than other religions throughout history. But I don't think that discounts the fact that like there is a pretty powerful structure of organized religion in India, which is like run by Hinduism, and we shouldn't be like putting that down.
But yeah, of course, but that's also because it has been one religion that has evolved over time. It's not stayed constant. If you look at Hinduism as it was, probably before the emergence of other religions in our country, it was very different. You did not have, it was not systemic in any way. It was only after other religions came to our country, we started, looking at those, see, the whole Bhakti movement came about because, we started adopting different, religions and their practices into our culture. That is how the entire Bhakti movement came around. Before that, there were no hymns in our religion. We were only taught, parts of the Gita. We never used to engage in, bhajans. It was only because we wanted to make it more, receptible for the people, like the general populace, that, the Bhakti movement came about and our religion evolved. So I think that is the kind of choice that you get if you are probably from like an Eastern religion, just because it's so old that you have different levels of the religion, and according to where you are spiritually, or where you are in your life, you're able to choose what kind, whether or not you actually want to follow the religion as it was earlier, or however you want to follow it for that
Yeah,
matter.
I think I was telling this to Marshall. I think I mentioned that like I really like going to temples and like the bhajan singing aspect of Hinduism and Hindu weddings, but not much else. And I guess you do have the freedom to pick and choose. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of so because when I was really amazed if we're comparing Eastern to Western religion, like in India, you can listen to a sadhu, right? And you can agree with what he says, or you can go find another sadhu, and the other sadhu might totally disagree with the previous one, and that's not a problem. Whereas in, many Western religions, if one priest disagrees with the other priest, one of them has to be wrong, right? And I think that's the other interesting part of that, is that there is this room for multiple interpretations of what the Dharma is, right? And it seems like the Sanatan Dharma movement is is a bit more codified than a lot of the other traditions in India that I've run into. But I mean, even if you just look at the word Hindu, it just refers to like the Indus River Valley, right? That's where that word comes from. So it's not referring to a specific person. It's not referring to a book. It just refers to the place. And that's the other thing that I thought was really cool about a lot of Eastern religions. And this is true with the Abrahamic religions too, but in America, it's not relevant. Um, when you live in India and you're a Hindu, like there is a physical, actual place where Lord Rama was born, right? There's an actual place where these things happened. Same in Shintoism in Japan, right? All of these gods and things, like there's a physical place where this happened. Whereas if you are a Presbyterian or a Methodist in America, they're talking about these places, Canaan, like the Canaanites, and all these things that happened 3,000 years ago in a place that you have no idea where it is. You might not even realize what they're talking about. Like I was talking to a Christian person last week, and they didn't know where the Philistines were because there's a whole book in the Bible about the Philistines. And I'm like, well, we call it Palestine. Does that make more sense now? And they were like, oh, right. Yeah. So that's what I think is really interesting, is you guys are like, oh, there's actually like a deity that inhabits this place. And that is not as much of a thing growing up in America. Being an atheist, I only learned about Christianity from the outside, and I was kind of taught by my father to just like not believe in religion at all. So it's definitely interesting looking at these different ways of viewing it. Right? Is it a location based thing, or does it have nothing to do with location? Do you have a choice? Can you argue? Can you disagree? Right? There's all of these different dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting how we've incorporated that into like structured Hinduism overall. Like, Sonal, do you remember how we had like 4 stages of Hinduism, where in the fourth stage, it's always the man who leaves the family and goes on a pilgrimage and finds himself alone before he dies. Like that's like the fourth and final
The
stage.
sannyas spirit.
Yeah, the sannyas period, if I remember right. Like I think it's cool how like they've incorporated that into the religion, so you can choose which pilgrimage you want to take. Like I know a lot of people who went to Kashi, and like a lot of people who go to a lot of different places to achieve whatever kind of solace or nirvana they can get. And I don't know, I think that counts for something in favor of
You
Hinduism.
know, that's also because when you see about the way it is structured, they always talk about sannyas at the end of life, you know, because in Hinduism there is this, you know, there is this belief that spirituality does not need to be everyone's topmost priority. You know, they're like, you need to live life. You know, you can't just leave everything, and they don't force you into a faith, which I find very, you know, different. So you actually have the choice to choose when, at what point in your life you feel it's like, you know, you need to be mentally ready, is what, you know, most Hindu texts try to say. If you want to achieve some sort of spirituality, you can't just, you know, blindly believe in something. You need to ask questions, and you need to be ready, you know, to actually get there or reach that point of enlightenment or whatever, you know, it is that you're trying to achieve.
Like there's an education period, and there's a period where you can bear a family and take care of it and provide for it, and then you have like a retirement, so to speak, from life, where you can just do your own shit and figure things out. And
Mhm.
I think that speaks to something. So like I don't know whether I mentioned this, but Sonal and I went to a school where the founder of the chain of the schools that we were part of basically used to translate the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit
Oh, wow.
to from Sanskrit to a lot of regional languages in India. So that's including English.
And
So
not only in India, he was a very eloquent speaker. He used to go abroad. Most of his talks were in English, and yeah, and he used to try to, you know, educate the common man, so to speak, about, you know, what exactly the Bhagavad Gita talks about. And you know, he used to spend hours on just on one or two verses, and
yeah.
you know, trying to explain what exactly it means. And the most interesting part was he didn't just try to explain the literal meaning. He tried to, you know, correlate it with the, you know, social setting at this point in time, so that people could actually use the learnings of the Bhagavad Gita in their day-to-day life. And it wasn't just like a
Hmm.
moral value, you know. So it was not just an
Yeah,
ideology statement.
that's awesome, because I actually went to a talk pretty recently about consciousness in the Bhagavad Gita, and the only part we talked about was the part where Krishna is talking about the idea of kshetra, right, and like the field knower and what is the field. So yeah, that's really awesome. And I do you know? So what was the name of the school, if you don't mind my asking,
No
or like
problem. It was
where?
Chinmaya.
it was called Chinmaya Vidyalaya, and it
Hmm.
was founded by
And
this Swami, like a sadhu.
Oh wow, yeah.
yes,
Yeah, like a
Chinmayananda
sadhu.
Swami. Yeah, he was a sadhu. He actually went to the Himalayas. He meditated over there for years under a specific sage. Like his name was Tejomayananda. And he was there for quite a few years. And then apparently he reached a state of enlightenment, and he realized that he actually wanted to come back to the people, and he wanted to talk about his learnings and what he learned during his time with the sage. It was just like, I want to bring it to the people. So
He had a
yeah,
really
Hmm.
cool
that's
life too. Like he started out as an
mhm,
atheist, and then he became a freedom fighter against the British.
yeah.
And then I don't know, something about freedom fighting must have given him a sense of spirituality. So he decided to go to the Himalayas, as Sunal mentioned. And then he started like this chain of schools, and basically started like trying to teach the ideas of the Bhagavad Gita. His whole shtick was that the Bhagavad Gita is really secular, so it's not really Hindu because it can be adopted by anybody. And I think he kind of inculcated that well, because our school had a lot of diverse religions. So we used to have like Muslims and Christians and Jains too study in the same school as us. So it was
Mhm.
never really like a Hindu only school, even though it propagated Hindu values. So yeah, that was a.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's really interesting, because it's interesting that it's like a religious school, but one with plurality.
Mhm.
Um, as opposed to when I grew up, I went to a school that was 100% secular, but and the only time we'd ever learn about religion was in history class. We'd spend like 2 weeks learning about the life of Jesus, and then one day learning about Hinduism and Buddhism, both in the same day. And to me, like as a Buddhist at the time, it really bothered me because I'm sitting here listening to this history teacher get even the most basic fundamentals of my religion like totally wrong. And then moving on to Hinduism and getting even the most basic fundamentals of that religion totally wrong. And then the next day we learned about Islam, and all like the things he said about Islam were just like so beyond untrue. I don't even know where he heard them. So yeah, it was like it's weird because it's a non-religious school, but there's no plurality whatsoever, right? It's more like we'd rather have you learn about Christianity and then the rest is optional, but we are secular.
So would you have preferred like religion classes or something? Like,
No, we had no. Yeah, no, we had no religion classes or anything whatsoever. It was 100% secular atheist schooling, and all of the science classes like pushed the idea of atheism. Maybe not explicitly, but like implicitly, you know.
I mean, actually, this concept is quite alien to us because I was just trying to think of one school that we, in the area where we grew up in Cochin, that's secular. I mean, either they were funded by a Christian convent, or it was a Hindu school, or it was, by a, like probably a mosque, like it was funded by a mosque. I can't think of a single secular school in Cochin.
I don't think it's possible to be fully secular, to be honest. I definitely don't think it is. I think like when it comes to religion, I feel like the role of majority has more power than it should. And I feel like you're always going to have infiltrating Hindu or Christian or Muslim ideas into whatever education system you're trying to have. And I like how Muslims are more unabashed about it in India, because we have like blatantly Muslim schools, right? Like you have like the Aligarh University, which is mainly for Muslims, and you even have Christian schools like Saint Xavier's and stuff, where there's like a 6% reservation, more than that, for Christians alone. So it's very clear that this is a school or university with Christian or Muslims or Hindu values. I feel it's more rare to find a blatantly Hindu school that only has Hindus in India, mainly because India is so Hindu, and it's just majority of the people there are Hindu.
People already, consider Hindus to be privileged. So that's kind of why we don't get a reservation. I mean, think about Jamia, JNU. Obviously, certain sects of our community do get reservation over there, and the reason they do is because they are considered to be less privileged. And it's kind of weird that we are not just talking about schools; we're talking about these are universities.
So it's basically affirmative action, but for like minority religions. It's very similar.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't really think we have affirmative action for religions in the US. I'm not very sure how that goes.
Yeah, no, it's primarily like a race and income thing in the US. We do have a lot of, like, in my town, we have a couple religious schools. But it's more just like, I don't know, I've never even been to one. I've known people who have gone to them, and it's like in the Christian religious school, everybody's Christian. Like there are no, and it's usually like everybody is this specific sect of Christianity. And the reason they're sent there is because they don't want, like the parents don't want their kids to be exposed to other religions and cultures. So they send them to a specific religious school. So we don't, but there are no Muslim schools, there are no Buddhist schools or anything like that in the United States. So I think it's just kind of a different animal altogether, you know what I mean? Because there's so much less of the idea that every school has some fundamental religion is, I think it's true in the US, but it's kind of ignored and hidden away, so it's not much of a thing.
Yeah, my cousin goes to a Catholic school and she's Indian, and she was talking about like how they're very unaware of other cultures. Like they're very blind to it. I don't think that's a bad thing per se, but like it's definitely obvious to anyone who looks different in a school that's mainly Catholic and white probably. So yeah, she was talking about that. I guess it's just different.
Mhm.
And I don't know how good or bad it is personally.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
actually, I.
yeah,
Go ahead, Sana. What were you saying?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I actually had this question and I've been wanting to ask this. Were there any lifestyle changes that you've had since you converted? I mean, since you converted your religion, did your lifestyle change significantly in some way, other than the meditating aspect?
Yeah, so it's my lifestyle didn't change that much, but I enjoyed like being able to use my religion as an explanation because I just had a different lifestyle from most people that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I grew up, in a region in a school where it's just like, yup, all of the guys are kind of jerks and they're very loud and they swear a lot and they are disrespectful to women and all of these things. And I had none, I just was taught to like be better than that. So often I would get crap for like not being loud and not being rowdy. And for a while, I didn't know what to say. I'm just like, I'm sorry, I'm just not like that. But then I could finally be like, actually, it's against my religion to say bad things about women, like to their face. Like I wouldn't, and it just makes it easier to say, yeah, like I'm not going to be complicit in you calling a woman, a cow to her face. And I don't have to just say because of who I am. I can say it's because I actually follow these set of guidelines. I have a name, which is interesting because it's almost like if you don't follow a religion that specifically says you're not supposed to engage in like violence and being mean, then you have no right to detest those things. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need an excuse, or else it's like a character flaw.
Mm-hmm.
So that, which not to say that that worked very well, like being a Buddhist in high school alienated me from a lot of people. Just because like the aura of Buddhism is quite effeminate, right? It's a feminine, more woman-like philosophy than those held by the average high school guy. Um, Obviously, so that I think that was the biggest lifestyle change was the fact that I felt like I had more of a license to voice when I felt something was like totally egregious happening right before my eyes. But
Mm-hmm.
that was it. I mean, I ate less meat, yeah, like, but that not much else changed because I wasn't like a sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of person to begin with.
I mean, I don't know. If you were Hindu, calling a woman a cow would probably have been a compliment in some areas. So
Yeah.
now, like,
I Yeah, that I was thinking that as I was saying it. I'm like, well, that's
Uh,
not,
yeah, but I mean, that's
yeah,
really
but
interesting. I think you're right about like Eastern religions being relatively like gynocentric. Like, I know that my so
is it?
like don't you think so? So now, like, okay, so my family has, you know how like most of us have family gods, right? Like family
Mm-hmm.
temples that we frequent near our family homes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so like both on both sides of my parents families, we had two family gods, and both of them were female gods. Both of them were goddesses basically. So like we had to go to temples and do rituals that basically speak to femininity. I can never pronounce that, but yes, you get the
Okay.
idea.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I feel like
I
Hinduism
mean,
is
I
pretty
don't know.
gynocentric.
I mean, just because you pray to a god of a particular religion does not mean it, necessarily allures to a particular gender. First of all. Secondly, I don't think there's a bar on who can be your god and who you can worship. Because both Nidhi and I were part of this caste called the Nair community. And basically, one very distinctive factor about the Nair community is that it's matriarchal. And
Yeah.
even among Hindus, that is not a very, it's pretty it's only there in Kerala, and this community does not exist anywhere else. Even though we're basically Kshatriyas, the Nair community is localized in Kerala, and they are like the only matriarchal
Society.
family,
Yeah.
matriarchal
Wow.
society that we know of. Yeah. So our experiences in our ancestral homes can be quite different from what the normal Hindu goes through, because we have these. Other than that, basically, um, we have certain deities in our ancestral homes who are actual human beings. Like in my
Yeah.
house, in my ancestral house, we pray to one of the oldest member of our family. Like I'm talking about 5, 6 generations back. We call him the Karnavan, who is like the head of the family. We pray to him. There's a temple about him. And it's like a small village, and we have a temple in his name, and we go pray to his god or his
Yeah.
deity. So I mean, there's basically no bar on who your deity is or who you want to pray to. So I think the fact that, the gender of your deity really does not matter per se. So in that sense, I really don't know how exactly it allures. I mean, the concept of it being, more alluring to women is slightly alien to me personally. Because I've not seen, like, okay, even if you think about, how Indian scriptures are talked about, like you mentioned earlier, it's always the man who goes to sannyas. It's always the man who carries out the spiritual, part of, who explores their spiritual side. You hardly ever see women do that, or even in our text, it's hardly ever mentioned that a woman was trying to explore her spiritual side. I don't know how it is in Buddhism, but I've not heard of many examples where women have become sannyasis and, attained enlightenment per se.
Like there
You
is a
know?
respect for the womb, though. That's something that's pretty common in Hinduism. Even though, like,
But I think Marshall was talking about something very different. He was talking about, an effeminate character attributed to someone who, follows Eastern religions, which
right.
in India, just because I think it's a, religion followed by the majority of people, I don't think that, is very relevant over here in India per se.
Yeah, I actually wrote a paper about this. I wrote a paper about femininity in religion as it evolves through time, and I think it's important just to note that when I say, oh, Western boys and men are very masculine and they devalue femininity, that doesn't have much to do, I think, with Western religion, because again, like this school I went to was a totally secular school. All of these guys were atheists, right? They didn't use their religion to justify misogyny or anything. Um, but what I feel about that is because I have talked to some religious people and secular people, because for as a Buddhist, two of the main deities that you pray to are Avalokiteshvara, who is a woman, and is the embodiment of compassion, and then Manjushri, who is a man, and he's the embodiment of wisdom. And lots of God, you pray to a woman? Like, you look up to a woman? Oh my God, right? Or like, and it's, to me, it blows my mind. And even in religious communities, because in the paper I wrote about how early Christianity was gynocentric. Like, Jesus was cast out of society because he talked to women, and you're never supposed to talk to women, right? So I think it has a lot more to do with the culture that underlines the religion, right? Like my culture is very androcentric, very masculine culture. So a Christianity that evolves in a masculine culture will acquire those masculine undertones, regardless. That's why you see a lot of early Christian communities in like the Middle East where it's not the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's the Father, the Mother, and the Holy Spirit, right? And the fact that there's a female entity in the Holy Trinity like sets off all sorts of alarms for Westerners. So I think I think that's kind of a good perspective where I don't think Hinduism is necessarily more or less, or Eastern culture is more or less gynocentric. I think the culture that underlines the religion is less androcentric. Maybe not like it, because I notice in Hindu culture and in most Eastern cultures, it's still like patriarchal most of the time, right? The guy is in charge of most things. But the idea that a woman or a female presence could be prayed to, or the idea that the feminine principle is something to be revered, even being on the table, right, is new to a lot of Westerners. They actually had a friend too that wrote a paper about how Jesus dying on the cross was really a way to take in dying on the cross and then birthing Christianity by suffering on the cross was a way to take the pain of childbirth and make it about men.
Oh wow, that's an interesting.
Yeah, and that when she told me that, I was like, oh my god, like I'd never even thought of that before. But yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with this culture that underpins it. What do you guys think about that? Because obviously Hinduism varies a lot, even just across India. Do you see any even just groups of people that tend to be more masculine or more feminine, and do they express that through their religion?
You know what? This is really interesting because I am so unsure about this. I feel like historically,
I don't think we've never seen it in this light before, to be honest, because
because hasn't there always been an emphasis in Hinduism on like balance, like on yin and yang, but on Indian terms? I feel like there's always been. I've never really seen a place where one particular like gender is given prominence over the other in religion per se. I'm not talking about like organized religion. Like you have RSS, which is like a kind of a militant Hindu group that tells all women to like give birth to 7 Hindu kids. There'll be more Hindus in the world and yada yada. But this is like,
where are you getting this idea?
Mohan Bhagwat said that, Sonal. Her grandfather was in the RSS, so she's kind of
no, I mean we're gonna talk about this later, but then
about the femininity thing.
About the femininity thing. Wow, now I'm confused. What's the word? All right. Yes. So when you think about the religion as such, I don't think they're like the way it started out. If you look at the Vedas or whatever it is that the initial scriptures that came out that you usually associate Sanatana Dharma with, those scriptures were never about a deity or a goddess. It was about how you're going to fulfill your spiritual needs. So I think initially there was no conversation about gender as such. In the religion, it was something that came up much later. I don't think that we necessarily associate again a person and how they behave to other genders with their religion. I think it is more of a what background they come from, what strata of society that they come from, and that necessarily need not directly point to how they are going to behave to people. Then again, if we think about the deities that we have, the most aggressive deity is a female, like goddess Kali or Durga.
Yeah.
Yeah. She has Rakshasa heads around her, like that's how you depict her. She has Rakshasa heads around her neck. She makes a necklace out of that. So, I mean, and she is the epitome of power,
And she's
right?
got her foot on like Shiva's head, right? In most depictions
Mhm,
of her, she's
mhm,
technically like she's got masculine qualities, and
mhm.
she's like a pretty powerful goddess, and a lot of people pay to
She
her
is the
and fear
most,
her.
no, she is the most powerful goddess. I mean, the god, like when you even, compared to other gods too. I mean, it was when the other gods were not able to defeat a particular Rakshasa that, Durga Mata took the, avatar of Kali and she tried to destroy the Rakshasa. I mean, that's the story. So she is basically much more powerful than all others. And, Nidhi, I don't think you are really used to this culture, but in North India and especially in like my area, no, this is not there in South India at all. It's
Hmm.
mostly a North Indian thing. Um, there is a particular way in which you have to do puja for Durga. You
Okay.
can't do the puja the way you do it for male gods. And they say that if you have a deity of Durga in your house, then you have to follow the ritual to the T. I mean, you can skip the puja for Lord Vishnu or Shiva and he'll forgive you, but Goddess Durga is not going to do that. You know, you have to,
Mm.
they are completely devout, and there's a particular way in which you have to follow it, and nobody skips the puja and nobody skips the ritual because they actually fear the goddess.
And
So
it's
I mean,
interesting that like even like masculine traits like wisdom and knowledge is also associated, and wealth are also associated with feminine gods in India. Like Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge.
Saraswati,
Saraswati,
wow.
oh my god, is the goddess of wisdom and knowledge, and Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth. So like those are traditionally masculine things that are assigned to female goddesses, whereas Indian society has always been like relatively sexist. I mean, they've always maintained like roles for men and women, but I don't think Hinduism has been constrained by that.
Yeah, and that really contrasts to a lot of Western religions where it's like straight up like women are property. Like it really, it's a lot of Western religions are extremely clear about the fact that women are property.
Mm-hmm.
I had to write a whole page about parts of the Bible, which and even in a secular society, the morals and the cultural norms are from Judeo-Christian like tradition. That it's undeniable. Even if you're an atheist, your opinions about women likely you learned them from someone who was religious, right, and who was a Christian, right. And people bring up like Sodom and Gomorrah as this story about morality, but it's really like it's a city where the men are kidnapping, murdering, and raping women and children like on the daily.
Mm-hmm.
And God says there are no good people in that city. So the first question is, okay, so the women and children that are being raped must not be people then. Because if there are no good people and you're talking about everyone, then they in many societies, Christian societies have used that exact part to justify why women are not considered people and are property, and that's why you have a dowry, right? So your father pretty much sells you to a husband for money, and it's a literal business transact. Like, so does that is that a thing in Hindu or Indian culture where it's not only just like the women have a different role and status, but women literally like have a different level of personhood?
Yeah, I think that's very universal. I mean, didn't, okay, so women are associated with cattle in the Mahabharata quite a bit, if you read into it. Like, women are sold by their fathers along with um, sheep, I mean, not sheep, sorry, cows. And there, I can see the association between like women and chattel. Like, I can see the birth giving association, and I kind of get it. And also, like, even though Hinduism has matriarchal aspects, even though Sonal and I grew up in a matriarchal society as well, it also had sexist underpinnings because it was easier to signed off money in the hands of women because the men could control whom the women marry and where the money goes. So it was easier to
Yeah.
give the power, the financial power, to women than to men in the family. So I think that kind of
But then
sets
I
it.
think it is also necessary to separate our culture from our religion. And I mean, that's really weird saying that, I know. But, like Nidhi said, there's a structured part of Hinduism and there's a completely unstructured part of Hinduism. So, all in all, you basically don't have a beginning and an end to Hinduism, which most other religions have. So it's very easy to know where exactly certain traits come about in Hinduism, especially because there are so many, like, it has diverged and people have started interpreting Hinduism their own way, probably just because it's been around for much longer. It's very difficult to sort of attribute it to a particular movement, or it's sprouted from here. It's very difficult to pinpoint. Having said that, Hinduism did not, the easiest way to explain this is that we don't have one particular book that we refer to. It's over time, there were multiple, books that came out. We have a lot of religious texts that we refer to. And even today, Hinduism is a religion that is constantly evolving. There are a lot of cultural practices that were part of Hinduism that were sexist in nature, including dowry, sati, that were completely abolished. Sati was basically, I don't know if you're aware, it's like the woman walks into fire the day her husband dies.
Yeah,
She doesn't
yeah,
see a reason to live anymore, and it was not even out of will. After a point, it was just because the society forced them to do this. Even
yeah,
widowers, they were asked to wear white saris, and but this sort of these traits of discrimination, they were not limited to just a gender discrimination. If you think about casteism, the way it impacted the social structure of our country, we are trying to dissolve it at this point in time. So it's not exactly attributed to the religion alone. It is also very culturally ingrained in us, if I may say so. And the thing is, it's constantly evolving. It's not static. It's not like, hey, this is what we are
yeah.
going to follow, and it's not rigid. So I mean, it's very difficult to say where exactly certain ideas sprouted from, whether it is part of our religion or just part of the culture, or it's just something that emerged as a part of society, and how the society behaved at a particular time period. Because a lot of these practices have not even been mentioned in our in the myths that we talk about in folklore either. It came about much later. So
Yeah. There's a book called The Chalice and the Blade by Rian Eisler, and there's a part of it where she talks about um, self-immolation by widows as this tradition that appeared in multiple cultures at the same time, like way later than they actually started practicing the religion. Because and I wrote about Viking culture, which is this notoriously masculine culture. Widow burning, it was not even a thing until 3000 BC, and then it started being a really big thing, and it all across Europe it started being a thing. So I definitely get you that there it's like a two-way street, right? The religion does not just affect the culture, it goes the other way around in the sense that you might you might claim that this is a religious tradition, but in reality it's just a cultural tradition that you have attached to the religion.
And
And that's why I think the folklore is so important, because you can get a totally different set of values from Hindu folklore than you do from looking at the historical structure of Hindu society.
that's such a good point. Also, because like the distinction between religion and culture is like really intangible, and you can never tell what part is affecting what. And the fear is very existent. Like I had a pretty privileged upbringing. Both my parents are very educated, and like they gave me relative freedom to just do whatever I wanted, religion wise. But they used to tell me that like I can't go into a temple when I'm menstruating, and I believed it and I followed it when I was young. But I think last year I once went into a temple and I was on my period then, and I forgot about it. But I was actually scared. And I was
Yeah.
scared. Like, I think I told you this, Sunal. I was
Mhm.
worried. I tried to tell myself, like, no, I'm educated. I'm going to the US next year. I shouldn't be worried about something as stupid as this. But it was like a
Epitome of
lingering
education,
fear.
US.
Yeah, I know. But it was like a lingering fear that like that didn't go away for some time until I forgot about it. And I just think that like I think there's a certain fear attached to all the traditions that we follow. So now, like, I don't think it's as non-rigid as you were saying. I think it is somewhat rigid, and I think that it's
I,
like the more it's mentioned to us and the more it's kind of like forced down our throats, like it stays with us no matter how you try to get rid of it.
No, but Nidhi, I think that again comes, I had a very different experience with Hinduism. I was never introduced to the Bhakti movement. My parents were, I mean, my dad is a devout Hindu. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a particular kind of Hindu, though. He does not follow any rituals or pujas, but he also tries to, he's trying to find meaning in life. And, he's a very spiritual person. I myself don't know what, part of the spectrum of Hinduism he belongs to. But anyway, so I was never, you know, taught that way. I was never taught superstitions. In fact, I used to live with my grandparents, and my dad used to tell my grandmom not to talk to me about any superstitious things. Even though behind the curtain, behind the doors, we used to like follow stuff. Like, okay, so there was
So
this
many superstitions.
superstition, yeah, that I really didn't know we followed, where three people would not get into the car together before we left the gate. So my mom would open the gate and she would stay like outside the car until we left the gate, and then she would get into the car. So three people couldn't get into the car together.
Did you
I
have the
mean,
once you step out of the house, you can't go back inside again because the evil eye will come? My mom still follows
yeah,
that to this day, and she's
yeah.
70
And
degrees.
we have to like sit down. And so if you go outside and you want to come back, you have to, once you return, you have to sit on a chair or on the bed for like 2 to 3 seconds, and only then can you go out
I
again.
did that
So these were,
yesterday. My mom was like, come
yeah.
back here, sit on this chair for 2 seconds, then you can head out again. I'm like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, so I mean, so I was completely, like my parents tried to keep me away from that, and because they wanted me to discover my own side of Hinduism, just because they realized that, for different people, the Hindu religion alone means different things. So and my dad always expected, like, he expected me. It was not even, he didn't even leave it to choice. He expected me to ask questions, to question every single practice that was there. He wanted me to do that, and he wanted me to make sure that whatever it is that I'm following it because I want to. So that was my experience with Hinduism, just because my father followed that strata, or he himself was not. Again, he went to the same school that I was talking about, Chinmaya, and he was in Chinmaya while Chinmayananda Swami was alive. So he has, had conversations with Chinmayananda Swami one on one. He's actually a relative of mine. Um,
Oh
Chinmayananda
wow.
Really? I didn't know
Swami.
that.
Yeah. It's it's not something I talk about, but yes. So my dad was really influenced by him. Um, so I think that was, because that was my experience with Hinduism. I don't necessarily have a fear, per se, of not following certain rituals, or um, but yeah, then again, I think it is. I mean, of course, if you're brought up being told something, you're going to fear. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to, do it regardless of whether or not, you personally believe in it.
Yeah.
Mhm. So that's that.
Hmm.
A fun fact, Marshall, I might be related to Kamala Harris. Very exciting news.
Oh man,
Yeah,
what a shock!
what a shock.
That's wow. Yeah, like what?
Okay, so I think we've reached like 40 minutes. Thank you so much for coming on. This was really interesting and cool, and we should do it
Yeah.
again if you're free sometime this semester.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the show. That was it's very fun.
Of course. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I'll see you soon. Bye, Marshall.